then did you go out to see? Someone dressed in soft robes? Look, those who wear soft robes are in royal palaces. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, see, I am sending my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you. Truly I tell you, among those born of women, no one is arisen greater than John the Baptist. Yet the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he.
Was searching for the perfect birthday card for her husband. She came across a promising one. On the outside it read, "Sweetheart, you are the answer to my prayers." Then she turned to the inside, which was inscribed like this, "You're not what I prayed for, but apparently you're the answer." Now, if you happened to be here in worship last Sunday, you might remember that we talked about that wild-haired, burlap-wearing, locust and honey eater named John the Baptist. Now, you heard how John found it difficult to do anything except scream at people, yelling them to repent and sin no more. John was going around dunking people in the Jordan River, trying to get them all cleaned up and turned around so they could live as God intended them to live. Well, just in case you thought we were finished with fire and brimstone, John, I have to tell you, John is still here this week. Yes. We're 1 week closer to the birth of that wonderful little baby boy, and we should be seeing stars and cattle should be lowing. The shepherds should be getting ready to watch their flocks as Mary and Joseph start out on the road to Bethlehem. That may be what we're praying for, but God's answer is not at all what we expected. Instead, we get more John. Only this week, John is sitting in prison. You see, John caused a huge uproar by telling King Herod, of all people, to get himself turned around and stop messing with his brother's wife. You can read that part for yourself. It's a real soap opera. Anyway. It shouldn't surprise us to see John pacing up and down in his jail cell, waiting to find out what's going to happen to him. Meanwhile, John's thoughts turn to that fellow Jesus, whom he had baptized a few weeks before. John realizes that Jesus was someone important. As a matter of fact, John knew as soon as he saw Jesus that he was the one. Jesus was the one who would turn the world upside down. Jesus was God's chosen one, come to let the world, get the world right side up once and for all. But as John continued to pace, he began to wonder if Jesus was the right one after all. You see, while John crossed the street to avoid traffic with sinners, Jesus looked for them and invited himself over to their homes for dinner. And while John was wrapped up warning people to repent and save their souls, Jesus came along and told people to leave the saving to God. So I think it was only natural for John to wonder about this so-called Messiah. When John was holding an axe in one hand and a torch in the other, Jesus was reaching out to the lowest of the low and offering them the gift of grace. Not exactly how one goes about changing the world, according to John's way of thinking. Now, John had a lot of followers of his own who thought as he did. The world needs to be changed right now, and the only way to do it is with floods and tidal waves that would clean up everything and everybody in one enormous show of God's power and control. And so John, from his prison cell, managed to get word to his disciples, go out and find Jesus, and ask him point blank whether he's going to start cleaning up the world or not. The disciples did as they were told. They found Jesus and asked him, "Are you the one or not? Are we supposed to put you on hold while we find someone else to clean up this mess?" And that brings us to the gospel lesson in Matthew. Now, if you notice, Jesus didn't give John's friends a direct answer. Jesus seldom did that sort of thing. Instead, Jesus pointed out that amazing miracles were happening. The lame walked, the blind could see, the deaf could hear, and people were being healed. True, these aren't the sort of miracles John and his friends had in mind. They weren't the miracles of biblical proportions, so to speak. Jesus wasn't going around parting the Red Sea. Rather, he was doing stuff like feeding the hungry, healing the hurt, comforting the lost, one little trickle at a time. Instead of a show of raw power from a tidal wave, God, who would sweep away everyone's doubts and fears in an instant, we have a steady drip, drip, drip of mercy from Jesus, who is playing doctor to a whole lot of marginalized people in this world. It's a steady drip, drip, drip of love that comes from the most unexpected places sometimes. Her parents held high hopes for a daughter of great elegance, a feminine reflection of her distinguished European background. They named her Joanna Marie. However, it very quickly became apparent that she was a Johnny, a tree-climbing, hot-tempered, insect-loving tomboy, now aged into an old lady. She was at least a little crazy, and she knew it. When she was 19, a psychiatrist told her parents that she had a touch of schizophrenia. Johnny spent most of her life alone, an unattractive misfit, struggling to make a place for herself in a world of norms too narrow for the likes of her. When her mother died 18 years ago, 3 years after her father had died, Johnny moved back into the big Victorian house, the very house in which she had been born. The neighborhood had suffered some changes in her 87 years. For a while, it deteriorated, but then it seemed to gentrify. Now, it was a real upper crust sort of place again. The homes around her sported some improvements, a sunroom here, a skylight there, but the trees remained familiar. Johnny knew them well, having climbed most of them. They were her observation towers from which to watch from a distance the other neighborhood children who were so very normal, from their game playing to their vicious cruelties. Her parents tried for years to encourage the other children to accept Johnny, but their efforts were painfully unsuccessful. There weren't as many children in the neighborhood these days, but there were plenty of young professionals interested in improving their real estate investments. Recent neighborhood improvements included Victorian-style lampposts, weathered brick sidewalks, and a no lawn ornaments policy. For the Christmas season, the candle plan was put into effect. The candle plan was the brainchild of Johnny's new neighbors to the right. Forrest and Suzanne Goring, rhymes with boring, according to Johnny. The candle plan required all the neighborhood residents to place a white candle in each window of their lovely old homes during the month of December. These pristine candles, according to the Gorings, would turn the entire neighborhood into the picture of traditional Christmas charm. Johnny refused to comply. She bought a big plastic reindeer with a light bulb in it at a yard sale and put it right in the middle of her yard. She intended to leave it there until spring. She wasn't trying to be different. She was different. Johnny had a family of golden finches, 5 of them. She allowed them to fly freely through the house, and she kept a supply of Lysol at the ready for daily cleanup. She believed the birds weren't nearly as messy as people thought. They were lovely and graceful and perfectly at home as birds. They balanced the household, for Johnny was awkward and clumsy and couldn't figure out how best to be human. She wondered often what it means to be human. Is it all about struggling and feeling humiliated, and then if you're lucky, watching your hands grow stiff and knees turn feeble and buying pinch food in 20-pound bags? Johnny was thinking about all these things as she stared out the window, and as she stared, she noticed smoke. At first it was just a little, and she thought it strange that the Gorings had a fire going, especially since they were both at work at their respective law offices. But the smoke didn't appear to be coming from the chimney. When she saw flames suddenly shoot from the roof, she knew something was terribly wrong. Johnny went looking for that old phone book, finding it on the top of the refrigerator, and she tried searching for the emergency phone number, and then she realized that she knew it all along. That's when she heard the sirens, and soon after watched the frenzied arrival of the big fire trucks. In spite of the firefighters' efforts to contain the fire, the house went up like a matchstick. Johnny knew this was a terrible tragedy, but she couldn't help think how beautiful the fire was in its rich coloring and passionate determination. Johnny watched as the Gorings arrived in separate cars. She saw Forrest try to comfort his wife in the midst of a great deal of smoke and confusion. Johnny felt very awkward doing it, but she put on a shabby old brown coat and very goofy-looking warm aviator hat that she had picked up at a flea market, and walked over to where the Gorings were holding on to one another. Each step was difficult for her. It was like coming down from one of her trees and approaching some of the other children. "Excuse me," she said in her most polite voice. "Would you like to come in and sit down?" Suzanne thanked Johnny, but told her they should really stay until the firefighters were finished. Now, one of the firefighters who heard was the conversation, said to the Gorings that they would be better off inside. He told them he would come and find them when it was all over. And so they followed Johnny into her house. The house was clean but strange. The Gorings were so upset they didn't even notice that the friendliest of the finches flew over and sat on the fireplace mantle across from the lumpy love seat where the Gorings sat. Johnny asked them if they would like some tea, and they accepted the invitation. Johnny filled the tea kettle and found 3 mugs. Then she put them back and went into her dining room, where she removed 3 lovely teacups and saucers from a china closet. After she rinsed them off, she returned for the matching teapot and cleaned that out as well. She looked through the pantry, hoping to find the package of cookies, but there wasn't any. Then she remembered an unopened box of Christmas ribbon candy that she had bought last year during the post-season Christmas sales. Candy like that doesn't go bad, does it? Johnny found the box in her bedroom and arranged some of the candy in a cut glass bowl and placed everything on a tray. Just as she was pulling 3 linen napkins from a drawer, she heard the tea kettle whistle. She poured the hot water over 3 tea bags and carried the tray into the living room. That's when Johnny realized that her hands hadn't bothered her at all during her preparations. Her knees seemed to have new life in them. Just then, Johnny heard a knock on the front door. A lovely young woman who looked to be in her early 40s stood on the doorstep holding a plate of cookies. "Hello, my name is Lorene. I understand the guardians are here. May I come in?" "By all means, do come in. We haven't met before, have we?" From her daily observations, Johnny felt as if she knew most of her nearby neighbors, even though she hadn't actually met them, and she wasn't prepared to like any of them, as much as she liked this woman from the start. Awkwardly taking a plate of cookies from Lorene, she motioned her around the corner to the living room where the Gordons were seated. Johnny replaced the ribbon of candy with the fresh cookies. Then she carried the tray to where 3 of her neighbors now sat. Suzanne Gordon was reciting a list of all the possessions that most concerned her. While Johnny expected the list to be full of priceless clocks and designer clothes, the list really contained all of the items Johnny would most be disturbed to lose. Photographs, a baptismal gown that had been in her family for generations, that she'd hoped to use for her baby's christening when she and Forrest were ready to have a child. All the items that were worth little or nothing on the market, but were truly priceless to Suzanne. Maybe this young woman isn't as selfish and trend-driven as Johnny thought she was. As Johnny poured tea for her guests, explaining that Lorene had brought cookies, there was another knock on her door. While many homeowners were accustomed to regular knocks on their doors, this was a banner day in Johnny's life. A young man with a strict teenage daughter stood at the door. This time, Johnny started the introductions. "Hello, my name is Johnny, and you're the people who live diagonally across the street, aren't you?" Johnny didn't take after her parents in many ways, but like them, she knew how to be gracious. Johnny invited Bob Gunther and his daughter Faith into the living room and left to retrieve more teacups. Shirley Gunther arrived a few minutes later carrying a basket of fruit. Within the hour, Johnny was hosting a group of 17 neighbors who wanted to offer support to the Gordons. Food arrived in a steady stream: vegetables with dip, almond cookies, eggnog. Neighbors had divided themselves into little groups. The Finches made themselves scarce. At one point, Forrest Gary laughed out loud, suggesting that except for the burning building, this was one of the best Christmas parties he had ever been invited to in the neighborhood. Johnny ended up spending most of her time with Faith Gunther, who was starting a junior year project researching the history of her neighborhood. She found Johnny to be a tremendous resource and talked her into setting up several interviews. The neighbors were much friendlier up close than Johnny ever imagined they would be. They seemed to be enjoying their odd old neighborhood. Thankfully, no one said a word about the reindeer, which Johnny was sure had suffered so much smoke damage by now that it would have to be dispatched to the dump. It was unquestionably a difficult season for the Gordons, who went to live with Forrest's mother while the house was completely rebuilt. It was, however, a season of unexpected blooming for Johnny. Johnny, the sudden hostess. Johnny, the neighborhood historian. For the first time in her life, and in a time of seasonal austerity, she felt warmth surrounding her.